Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I have an old project to share with you guys. I actually made this card several months ago, had the footage on my computer all this time, and finally getting a chance to edit it now. So I made this in the literally middle of the night. I'm talking like 1, 2 a.m. Last minute because I had to deliver it in later in the morning. And I'm using the Grillfather stamp from Art Impressions. And I didn't want the words "the Grillfather" on the apron on my card, so I covered that part with some tape, just using a few pieces to make sure it was completely covered. And then I inked up the stamp with Hero Arts black ink, and I just used my tweezers to pull off that tape because it's covered in black ink, and I didn't want to get it all over my fingers, even though I had ink and other things all over my fingers as it was when I was crafting that night. But anyway. I used my Fisker's stamp press to get this image stamped onto some Bristol Smooth cardstock, and then decided to die cut this with the largest die from my favorite things, Blueprints 1 Dynamics. This is one of my go-to dies. I always use this die for layering. I taped it into place with some micropore tape so that it didn't shift when I ran it through my Big Shot machine. Then once I had it die cut and ready to go, I wanted to color this in, and I used my Zig Clean Color markers. That's why I chose the Bristol cardstock to stamp these on, because these blend so nicely on Bristol cardstock. They also work really well on watercolor cardstock too, but right now I was experimenting with the Bristol. And my idea with this was I was going to create some sort of fire or something on the lower left of the card where he's, facing. So I would consider that my light source. And because I was thinking fire, it's like, okay, it's going to give off a lot of light. So I was using one of the yellow markers. I used, just yellow. And I was applying that to kind of the outer edges of this image and then adding in all the normal color, the flesh colors, all that sort of thing. But giving it all this kind of overcast yellow glow. I am not a major artist, anything like that. I've kind of picked up on things like this over time. This ended up working. It kind of looks a little weird, but as the more the image gets colored, it starts to come together. But as I was doing it, I was like, this might not work at all. But I kept going. And I've said this before, sometimes if you're thinking, an image isn't working, the color looks awful, just whatever, it's bothering you, leave it and walk away. Come back to it later, come back to it the next day. It's amazing sometimes how what you think you're seeing and then what you see when you just go and do something else and come back to it, more often than not, look as bad as you thought it did. At least that's been my experience anyway. So I went in and did each section at a time. I started with his skin because for me, that's usually the most difficult to color, especially if I'm experimenting with something like this, like adding, a bright yellow, because I didn't want him to look crazy. So started with the skin, did his aprons, and since that was simple, the apron I just wanted to keep mostly white with a little bit of shading. And then his little oven mitt, I wanted to do red, so I did some red and some orange. So that was simple because it just blended nicely into the yellow. And then I decided to create kind of denim looking shorts. This is where I was a little more careful, not completely covering that yellow with the blue because it would just turn straight up green. So I kind of went around it, and when I was using my water brush here and there to blend out the colors, I would make sure to clean off my water brush just to remove some of the excess color so that it wouldn't just turn into a muddy mess. So once I did that, I did the same thing with his little chef's hat. Just added a little bit of gray to keep things mostly white. I will have a list of all the colors I used on my blog, like in the blog post that I will link to in the description box below the video. So I will list every single color I used. I did keep my color list fairly simple. So I just went on and colored each little area and then trying to remember to add bits of yellow to all the parts that would have been facing this fire that he is, planning on fighting back. So once I got his, all the image colored, and I did forget a couple parts. One I noticed at the end, and the handle of those tongs he's holding, I completely forgot about. I didn't even notice it until I started editing this video, and I was like, I totally forgot to color that in, but it can be a white handle. It works for me. So I did the ground at the end and just started with the darker color, blended it with a medium, and then finally the light gray, and then took my water brush and just lightly blended that out. And then to create the fire, pulled out an old towel to cover my workspace, and then I'm using my color spritzer, which I did test out. The color spritzer does not work with the clean color markers because of the bristles. I couldn't get a splatter. So I pulled out 3 of my Tim Holtz Distress markers, and I used Squeezed Lemonade, Ripe Persimmon, and Festive Berry, so a yellow, an orange, and a red, to splatter on the color. I had thought about like drawing a fire with my markers, and I was like, it was too late and I didn't feel all that artsy and I did not want to ruin this. And I was like, splatter I can do splatter. So I started with the yellow, the Squeezed Lemonade, and then I spritzed on some Ripe Persimmon, and then I spritzed on some Festive Berries in the very corner. So it kind of went from red to orange to yellow, and that tied in, like that spritz just tied in the coloring and all that yellow I'd added to the image. So once I was happy with that, I went to stamp my sentiment. And this is where I made a big boo-boo. And again, in the back of my head, I've said this before, it's like I knew this was going to happen because I was stamping on a really smooth cardstock and I was tired and I totally flubbed it up, like smeared it so bad. So it's like, oh, die cut some cardstock so I can cover that. The sentiment set I'm using is no longer available. I didn't know that. That was another reason why I wasn't going to share this video. This set you cannot get. It's from Simon Says Stamp, and it was called Thought Bubble, and it got discontinued. Even I think way before I even made this card, I didn't think to look. So I will link to some alternate stamp sets with the supplies because this one's not available. But you can see I die cut the first with some yellow cardstock and then stamped and embossed the sentiment with white embossing powder, and I didn't like it. It just didn't show up enough. It looked okay on camera, but in real life you could barely read the sentiment. So I redid it again with orange cardstock, was happy, stuck that to the card front with some foam tape, and then created my base out of red cardstock cut to 8.5 by 5.5, and then scored at 4.25. So it's a top folding landscape card, A2 size. And I'd added some enamel dots to the card, which you'll see at the end as well. And then for the inside, I had die cut this piece of white cardstock and just used the spritzer all along the edges with the same colors, and then stamped a sentiment from the set. This time being much more careful, so I stamped it perfectly and didn't mess it up, and adhered that to the inside of the card, and that finished it off. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like I said, I will include links to all the supplies in the description box below the video, as well as some alternates to the sentiment set. And I will have that below, as well as a link to my blog post with all the colors I use to color. Thank you all so much for watching and thumbs upping and subscribing to my videos, and for all the comments. I really appreciate it. And I will see you guys very soon in another video. Bye.